Thank you so much. That was humbling and too kind. I'm touched and honored, and don't usually hear about myself written up that way, so it's a little humbling to say the least. I'm saddened to be here, and I'm saddened to be here because standing up for free speech, standing up for viewpoint diversity, saying to our students, my colleagues who are professors around the country, and to administrators around the country that students should be able to ask what they want to ask, question openly, and do so without fear of reprisal. I don't think that makes me brave. I don't think that makes me a leader. I think that makes me a good academic. I think that makes me a responsible teacher and a responsible thinker. In the academy, that's what we do. We question, we challenge. Our ideas are strengthened, improved, refined, and disseminated through the processes of debate and open discourse and free inquiry and free speech. So the fact of the matter is, it saddens me greatly that this sort of argument is now not embraced necessarily in higher ed, but has been forced into the shadows in higher education. And it's for that reason that I realized that as a New Yorker, someone who was in an ability or was in a position to push back, because I don't live on campus. I don't live in a small community. I live in a big city of many millions of people, and I had the ability to speak out and then disappear and walk away from the campus, that I had to speak up, I had to say something, and I had to do it. So earlier today I was asked just a quick question, and the question was, what's on the top of my mind right now as far as higher education is concerned? And over the last year or so, I've had the pleasure and privilege of meeting thousands of students at colleges and universities around the country. And what's unambiguously clear to me is that our students know that there is a problem. Our students are unhappy with the status quo. Our students know that they're not being exposed to a multitude of ideas, and our students know that they're being censored. They're being told, here's what you can ask, here's what you can't ask. Here are the terms of engagement. Here are the very things that, here's some of the terminology, some of the words, some of the protocols, the structures for how we have to talk. And they don't really like that. This fall, I'm teaching a first-year studies course at Sarah Lawrence College called American Dreams. I was a little apprehensive when I walked into the room the first day because I wasn't sure who was in the classroom. Turns out that I have 15 wonderful students, and these students were thrilled to be there. Every one of them said to me privately, and I'm sorry for revealing this, if any of my students are watching, hi. They've said to me privately, I want to know what you're about. I want to know what this class is about. I want to hear multiple viewpoints. And if you look at the course, and the course is called, again, The American Dream, and it was just written up in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and you can see the syllabus on the website there. It's about the history of the American dream, how it's changed, how it's evolved over time. And the syllabus is very balanced. The syllabus is very clear where I say, here's a right perspective, here's a left perspective. Here's this author, and here's that author. And here's where he or she is coming from, and here's where he or she is coming from. And the idea is to say there's some truth in the middle. And it's our job to read the history, to read the narratives, to read the memoirs, and try to discern what is fact, what is opinion, and then ultimately what is truth. My students seem to be loving it. I have to tell you, it has been an absolute joy to go to work, which is a lot different from exactly a year ago where there were protesters outside my door. But unfortunately, my students are being bullied. They report regularly that they are being harassed in their dining halls. They are being harassed in their residence halls because they won't denounce me or denounce the course. There's nothing to denounce in the course. I'm very proud of the course, and I'm very proud of my students for sticking up for the course, and more importantly, the idea that we should be able to question anything we like. That's the point of college. So I wanted to throw some statistics at you for a minute for why I'm so optimistic about undergraduates today. So if we look at the current first-year class, and notice there's my PC. I used to say freshman. Now I say first year. I'm fine doing that. 4% of incoming first years this year identify as far left or ultra-progressive. 2% identify as far right. That's 6% of people who identify on the extremes. 41% identify as moderate or in the middle. 23%, and this includes extremists, identify as being on the right. And another 36% identify as being on the left. This is not an extreme group of people at all. It's a balanced group of people. There's some folks on the left, there are a little more on the left, there are a significant number of students on the right, and most are in the middle. That's a good, normal curve. That's what ideology should look like. This is not a group of extremists whatsoever. And let me give you some more data to show you why. Well, turns out that when we ask incoming freshmen or first years what they think about a variety of issues, 88%, and I'm just going to look down at my notes so I get this exactly right, 88% of them say that it is a major strength of them or theirs to have the ability to work productively with people of diverse perspectives. 88% know about diversity and say it's a strength of theirs to work with it. 81% state that they are highly tolerant of others with different beliefs. This is exactly what we want on a college campus. 77% say that it's a major strength of theirs that they are able and looking forward to understand the world through another's perspective. It's hard to find fault with that. And 2/3 of incoming students say that they are open to having their views challenged. They want to be challenged, they are open, and they say that they're open. So if this is who our first-year class is, why are things so bad on college and university campuses? Well, my answer in a minute is our administrative class. Before I get there, the other takeaway, in addition to the fact that our students are all right, just as Michael Polyakov said earlier, our students are fine. The other thing to note, and I'm very grateful for ACTA for doing what it's doing, is that the world is noting this problem. Whether it's ACTA, FIRE, Heterodox, or any number of other wonderful groups and advocacy groups that are attacking this problem of free speech and viewpoint diversity, schools are listening, from the University of Chicago to Wesleyan to Claremont McKenna to even the University of California at Berkeley. Schools are taking steps to remedy some of these free speech problems. It's not going to be immediate. It's not going to be overnight, but they certainly realize that it's certainly going on. So let me tell you about this, this sort of process of why I got interested in this, and I'll try to be as quick as I can on that. And then I guess we may have a few minutes to chat for a minute. But about 20 years ago, I was an undergraduate at Stanford University. I had a wonderful time out there. I was a resident program assistant in a in a dormitory called Castaño, and it was an incredibly diverse place. We did quite a bit of public policy programming. We talked about everything under the sun. I remember spending many, many late nights where we were in heated arguments. Well, what's the Asian view on that? I don't understand the Mexican view. Here's my view as a Jew on how we deal with that. And we got into heated fights. It was great. I never felt that I was being dehumanized. I never felt that I was personally under attack, and I don't think any of my peers at the time felt the same way. It was debate, it was discourse, it was what you're there to do in college. It was a mixing of different ideas, different ideologies, and a chance to have that discourse. But something changed, and something very, very powerful has changed over the last 20 years. So the question is, what has changed? And I'll get there in one more minute, but first, once I got to Sarah Lawrence, I really began to notice some of these changes, and I'll give you a few examples. On the first week, or during the first week of my tenure as a professor, I was having dinner at the president's house. We were having a heated conversation about something. I don't remember, in fact, what the conversation was about at the time, but I remember saying, oh, well, that's a perfect example of the dark side of civic engagement. The dark side of civic engagement is a concept coined by progressive political scientist Theda Skocpol. She happened to have been my dissertation reader. And a trustee of color who was sitting on the other side of the table at the time paused the conversation and verbally assaulted me. She called me a racist, said my career was over, and my hate and bigotry has no place at a place like Sarah Lawrence. I used a progressive term. There was no hatred or bigotry in that term. That was a very unpleasant night. I began to realize maybe something else is going on. This is not what I had experienced 10 years ago when I was active as an undergrad. But it goes further. I regularly teach a course on presidential leadership. I am regularly accused of only teaching about white men. Yes, that's true. Up until President Obama, I only had a group of white men to talk about in terms of who occupies the Oval Office. I do try to talk about Obama a little bit, but I can't make it more diverse. Our president has been a white male up until Obama. That's just the truth, and people need to get over it. I collect Kitchuan art. I'm very proud of this art. I have purchased this art. I have relationships with many of the artists who made this art. I've had numerous students come into my office and demand that I apologize for having this art. They've assumed that I've either stolen the art or I'm exploitative in owning the art. It's not exploitation, it's appreciation. There's a big difference. When all of this was going down, I realized something is different, something has changed, and I needed to figure out why. I kept my head down, I got tenure, I didn't speak much about any of this for quite a while. All the while believing that truth emerges from debate and discourse, and it's hard to do that when dialogue is regularly shut down. Now, I was not the only person who realized this. People around the country realize this. People around the country have been writing about it, but everyone else has been writing about it from a psychological perspective or a sociological perspective. And I'm a political scientist. I'm trained to look at institutions, trained to look at what are the various powers on campus, what are the different forces, who has control, who has voice, and how do we do that? So I said, you know what, I'm an empirical social scientist. What the heck is going on? Let me see if I can figure that out. So I said, let's look at the students. And I certainly did. And as the earlier panel pointed out, turns out that our students were fairly radical in the 1960s. That's not news to anybody, but the data showed that. We actually had an extreme leftist presence of students on our college and university campuses. 5 or 6 to 1 of liberals to conservatives. It has never been that high since. In fact, today, and we've been able to track that from the 60s to the present, maybe it's 2 to 1 at the high point. As the data I had mentioned earlier, our students are not particularly extreme whatsoever. And it hasn't gotten worse in the last decade or so. And the more and more I talk to students, the more and more I realized they want to be listened to, they want to be heard, they want to talk. They're not the extremists. So if it's not the students who are pushing this, who's doing it? So obviously, it might be faculty. We always talk about what's going on in our classrooms. We always see stories about professors at NYU or people like Noam Chomsky or Cornel West, folks like that, making extreme arguments, being very politically active. So I spent a while looking into my colleagues, my faculty colleagues. And it turns out that, yes, my colleagues are considerably more progressive and considerably more left of center than the average American, about 8 or 9 to 1. And in some places like New England, as high as 28 to 1. And people immediately said, oh, well, that must be it. It's faculty. We need to jump on faculty. They're the ones who are creating the problems. The problems are in our classrooms. Well, it turns out that no, that's not entirely true. It's absolutely the case that there are certain departments that are extreme left. Incidentally, art history is the most lefty group you will find on our college and university campuses. And then you have groups like my campus, Sarah Lawrence College's Women's Studies Department, whose very mission is, quote, scholarship with activism, both within and beyond the college. So there are definitely examples of this that go on. But ideological imbalance doesn't mean more political engagement. So I spent a lot of time surveying and talking to faculty around the country. Turns out that most faculty, although they may be progressive and left of center, really don't care about engaging in politics this way or even want to spend that kind of time with their students. The dirty little secret is most of us want to go home. We like to do our research. We like to live in our ivory towers. We like to publish to the 12 people who read our stuff. And we want to hang out with our families if we have families. Many professors actually don't, turns out. Not a surprise. Sorry, it's a little snarky, but it's true. So while, yes, there are plenty of examples of faculty being very engaged and very political, it turns out I don't think it's the faculty. So then where is it coming from? What's going on? So I began to survey the landscape of higher education and noticed that all of these free speech flare-ups are occurring outside the classroom. They're happening in our residence halls, our dining halls. If you look at Yale, that occurred in one of Yale's residential colleges. And I realized, oh my goodness, we have this bloat that has been written about. We have been hearing about this major administrative bloat over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. And I'm not talking about provosts and deans at the very top. I'm talking about the mid-tier group of administrators, people who are in student life, student success, student affairs, diversity, inclusion, and residential life. It is amazing if you go to a university or collegiate website and look that up and realize how many people at how many schools work in residential life. And these people are living in many cases nowadays in the dorms, setting the tone. And you realize that these are the individuals who set the terms of engagement. Many schools open in August or September, but professors may or may not meet their students for 2 to 3 weeks. Why? They're being inundated in various fora about how to act, how to think, how to behave, and are being told what to do, what to say, how to think, and how to engage, whether it's at orientation programs, which I know we talked about earlier, or whether it's in residential life. If you have a dispute with your roommate, you can't just work it out like adults like we used to do in college, and I'm sure many of you have memories of that. Oh no, someone from residential life gets involved, and they project onto this the various terms that are often particularly progressive of how to engage and what can be said and what cannot be said. And I realized this may be the problem. Because now I get to class, and this didn't happen in my class, fortunately, but in many classes, students who don't think about their sexuality and don't want to talk about their sexuality are told in orientation, you have to declare your sexuality, your sexual preference, even though many of my students have told me, and students around the country have told me they don't want to. And you get to class, and you have to identify your pronouns and say, hi, I'm Sam. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Most students don't want to talk about that, but they're told you have to. And the shame and discomfort of sharing that is immense. But if you don't, you're considered evil in many cases. Very problematic. So I surveyed our college and university administrators. I looked around. I spent a lot of time looking at who they are, what they do. Turns out that if our students are a little left of center and our faculty are definitely left of center, our administrators are extremely left of center. If faculty are 6, 7, or 8 to 1, our administrators are 14 to 1. Good luck finding a conservative administrator on our college and university campuses. It turns out that when you survey administrators and faculty, you can find some other very scary things. It turns out that 80% of our administrative class wants to engage in social justice teaching and action. They believe that that's an essential goal of the university, of the higher education system. It turns out that barely a third of our college and university professors believe that. So we have a problem. We have students who come in fairly normal, fairly curious. They spend time with their professors, time in their classrooms. It's very limited. Most of their time is spent outside the classroom, and what do you know? They're being told what to think, how to engage, how to have that level of discourse. I had the chance to ask faculty and administrators a little bit about all the protests that we keep seeing and are happening. So it turns out that when you ask them, have you helped plan or advise these protests that we see all over campus? And this is what happened to me. It turns out that at Sarah Lawrence, I believe administrators actually actively aided the protests against me and called for my tenure review. Not, again, that I have any idea what that means whatsoever. It turns out that 5% of faculty have reported being involved in that. In contrast, 44% of our administrators are involved in that. Have you participated in the protests? Turns out 8% of faculty have. Almost 50% of administrators have. And do you support these various protests? 17% of professors support the protests in one way or the other. Over 2/3 of administrators supported the protests in one way or the other. So if we want to understand free speech, if we want to understand viewpoint diversity, we absolutely need to turn to the classroom. We absolutely need to make sure, as the panel earlier talked about, that we do provide more balance. We're slipping in some fields. Not all fields, but some fields. And just a personal shout out to the New York Historical Society. They have been perpetually generous, incidentally, to me and my students by always offering us complimentary seats to the various events that you have, and I'm very grateful for that. I don't know if Dr. Mirror is here, but thank you if she is. But we need to reach beyond just the classroom and realize that so much about higher education, so much about the undergraduate experience on our college and university campuses occurs outside the classroom. And that's where a lot of these ideas are coming from. And we need to address this head on. This year alone, though, as I said, our students are wondering why this is happening. They don't like it. They want more. And the survey data says that they truly are unhappy having their abilities to question, blocked, if you will. I have students, who have said to me repeatedly, that they really don't appreciate that they can't ask about, well, what does Black Lives Matter means? Because they're told if you ask about it, it's racist just to ask. That's troublesome. I've had students who were supportive of Hillary Clinton in the last presidential election feel bullied and physically threatened by those who supported Bernie Sanders on Sarah Lawrence's campus. As a reminder, no one supported Donald Trump on Sarah Lawrence's campus, so this is just a Sanders-Clinton phenomenon. And for our students to feel that they cannot share openly and support a completely legitimate, a candidate that is legitimate enough to run for president and feel threatened to do that, that's a problem. That's a huge, huge problem, and it needs to stop. But if the offices who do discipline, if the offices who set the tone, if the undergraduate student life offices are extremely progressive and clearly have an ideological agenda, we have a problem. Fortunately, places like ACTA, and again, the Heterodox Academy and FIRE and all these others realize this now. We've made inroads because people know now that there's much more going on. It's not just that the students have changed. It's not just we need to pay attention to what's going on in the classroom and we need to pay attention to the faculty. We need to pay attention to everybody, and in particular, the administrative class. This is where ACTA plays a huge role as well by pressing our trustees and pressing our alums to demand more. They can say, look, you can't do this. You have to be more balanced. You have to make sure that students feel comfortable. You have to make sure that students can talk freely, ask questions, and not fear some form of reprisal, whether it's emotional or physical. College is about asking questions. College is about being uncomfortable. That's the whole point of higher education. We can't retreat into our safe spaces all the time. We need to be able to have that discourse. And a lot of the flow on college and university campuses is preventing that. So this research, and this is first and foremost a research project. I didn't really envision myself as being someone who stood up to a mob and continues to do that, but this is what the data shows, and this is where things are heading. And the more attention we pay, the more we can do. This is going to be very slow. It's not as if we should be legislating this. Colleges and universities are realizing it's a problem. Not all of them, but if trustees are doing their jobs and they know what those jobs are, and ACTA has this wonderful, that's not it, the wonderful card on the back table talking about what the duties of trustees are and should be. If trustees are doing their jobs, this can be solved. Again, it's not going to occur overnight, but we need to make sure it does. And this is not an encroachment on academic freedom, because we're not telling our faculty what to teach. We're saying to our administrators, you need to make sure things are more fair. They're more balanced and more open. That's fair game, because that's not about academic freedom whatsoever. I also would argue that our faculty need to get more involved. Traditionally, we like to live in our ivory tower. We like to do our research. We try to minimize our teaching and just focus on our writing. That's a problem. Our jobs are to be educators. If we want to just be writers, let's be writers. Work at a think tank, get a grant, go ahead and be totally scholarly, and there's nothing wrong with that. But our jobs are to be teachers and to work with students. So I think it's time for our faculty around the country to start doing that and be recommitted to doing that beyond graduate instruction, which is somewhat beneficial to publication, but to work with their students. I very publicly admit that I never really thought I'd end up at a liberal arts college. I was not trained to be a liberal arts professor, which is a heavily teaching sort of role. I was trained to be a researcher. Without any hesitation, I can tell you that it's one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do, you'll ever see, to work with students and help shape them and help them reach their potential. It's incredibly meaningful. And that's another avenue that we should be pushing, which is get back into the classroom, work with our students, and be the responsible adults in the room. The undergraduates may be adults, but we're experts in these fields. Let's do our jobs. So that's my 20 minutes. But I could talk for hours. At Sarah Lawrence, our classes are 3 hours on this. We only have 20. So I encourage you to go to my webpage at the American Enterprise Institute, where my articles have been posted. And obviously, if anyone wants to chat, send me an email anytime. I'm always happy to expand further on this. And again, I'm deeply grateful for ACTA and ACTA's support. When you have a mob chasing you down, threatening your family, and saying just horrendous things to you, you don't take it that seriously, because to know that you have a much larger group of people outside the academy saying, this is so important, we back you, and to have people from around the country saying, keep going, this is the future of higher education, you can look at one mob and go, sorry, that's a New York thing, but you go, it's no big deal. And to have the support of ACTA, and quite frankly, everyone in this room, it's incredibly meaningful. And I'm pleased to report that there are thousands of professors just like me who feel the same way. We're going to keep pushing, and at least we now know and have a roadmap of where to go and where we need to push and how to do it. Our students are great. Faculty are okay. We can do better, and we really need to watch our administrators. So I will stop there and say thank you.